Okay. To remove the left panel, well, the reason you'd want to remove the left panel is it lets you get to the shutter and the lens and the flash connection. And if you need to take off the viewfinder, then you have to take off this side. There's not really much under here to cause you grief. So this is actually the easier side to take apart. It's pretty straightforward. Just take out all the screws. I marked mine with paint marker, so I know which ones went where. All these blue ones that I'm currently unscrewing are all the same, so I don't need to worry about getting them mixed up. And then holding on the bales for the neck strap, the top one, at least when I got mine, has a little aluminum washer, spacer, boss, for lack of a better term. So it's a little screw, and it's got this little ring on it. The bottom one did not have that, and I believe that the bottom one is actually a shorter screw, so it couldn't even fit if you wanted to. Or it couldn't even fit one of those washers if you wanted. Okay. So, to remove it, you just need to slide it forward towards the front of the lens to disengage the speed selector gear. So I'm going to lift it up slightly, and then just slide it forward and lift it straight up. So inside there's really nothing, just a light black string light gasket. You've got your 2 screws that hold on the viewfinder on this side. Make sure they're tight. Okay. The shutter mechanism is here. And here's your lens with basically an infinity stop. And your flash connection, which has a thin, small, probably phenolic insulator washer. And also on the top is a very thin spring steel spacer, washer, keeper that slides behind the speed selector wheel. There we go. Of course, now that I took it off. Come on, you little devil. Okay. So, it goes behind the speed selector wheel, behind the cam for the speed selector. Where are we? There we are. It's pretty hard to see. Let me draw a little crummy picture of it. So you've got your speed wheel here with its serrated teeth. On the back side, there's a brass cam. And then there is an arm coming down. This thin steel shim goes right between, well, it doesn't have this, but it goes right between that brass cam and that arm. There's a little bit of a gap there that you can see when you're playing with it. And then it snaps over these 2 screws so it doesn't escape. So if you're taking out the shutter, take out that plate, and then there's the section on how to remove the shutter. Take the shutter out. To put it back, you just start from the front, slide it rearwards to slide it right over that speed selector tooth and the flash socket, and reinstall the screws in their correct places. there you have it. To remove the shutter is pretty simple. There's really two major components. The shutter comes out as a single unit. It's a bunch of plates all stacked together. And then the shutter release button here. And all it takes is 2 screws. There's one at the top and this one at the bottom. I'm using a 2mm slotted screwdriver, and it's a pretty perfect fit. These screws were in very tight when I first did it. So make sure you have a really well-fitted screwdriver and a really good solid bite on the screw. Make sure the screwdriver is fully seated in the slot, and just apply gentle pressure and hope it'll crack loose. They're steel screws. They're not brass or anything strange, but they are very tiny and very old. And they're both the same. So they're probably about a 2mm. I don't know the pitch. Where are they hiding? Here they are. So you got 2 screws. And it seems like you don't want it cocked, because then you've got the shutter spring under tension. So we're not cocked. And it seems like also turning it to 1/10 makes it a little easier to get out. And you kind of lift and twist and pull and tug and wiggle, and it comes out. Because this, the trigger panel, or the shutter release panel, is hooked on the end of the shutter pin, or the trigger pin. And I couldn't really find, removing the trigger pin first didn't really help. So I think you just kind of have to maneuver it into position. So what I'm going to do is grab it here. And actually what I'm going to do, so since this wheel is on 1/10, what that's done is it's got the pneumatic control screw completely screwed in. So you can lift it straight out. It's still attached by the spring here, but it's a little more free floating. So we can get it off of this pin at the back. And then let's try to lift it. There we go. All right, so it's all loose, except for that little trigger pin right there it went. Okay. Then it all comes out as one piece. Before I get too far along, I'm going to put this back, put the speed indicator back at 10, and just drop it straight back into the hole so it re-engages with the pneumatic screw inside. Whoop, and there it went. So we're straight in. Our 1/10 is still straight up and down, so we're back where we started. Pop our shutter back into place, and there's the whole mechanism. It's pretty simple. This lever, this is your cocking lever. That pushes up, pulls all the way back down. There's a cam on your speed selector on the back side. There it is. So as you rotate the speed selector, you'll see this arm that my finger is attached to push down like that. So what that does is it applies more tension on the shutter spring, and at the same time, these brass holes here, there's a screw inside with an air vent. So this is actually a pneumatic shutter. And what that does is basically when it's there, which is 1/200th, it's The vent is fully open, so it basically disengages the pneumatic shutter. But at slower speeds, so we'll crank it back to 200. So there we are. We're wide open. But as you turn it down, it closes off that vent, as well as there's actually a tapered tip that fits into the hole and seals the air off to change the speed. So I'm going to wind it down to a 25th here and release it, and you can see the speed difference. You can also hear the difference. It's got a little bit of a air cushion whoosh to it. Come on. There we go. And then I'll wind it back to a faster speed, and it's just a direct click. So this is basically, you actually can see the cross section right here. So this is just a few layers. There's the outer skin here that has the spring plates attached to it. There's this chrome edge here, which is the film gate portion. And there are the basic, one or two of these, I think these steel plates in between are just spacer shims, and this is the actual shutter plates on the inside. It's pretty straightforward. I marked my edges red and blue so I could restack the pieces inside and know which way they went. It's not difficult. It needed a clean. It had some nasty sticky grease inside, and it's still running a little slow, but it runs slow at slow speeds and it runs fast at fast speeds. So I'm not too concerned about it, and there's not really a lot of adjustment. You can unscrew this needle screw inside 180 degrees, but doing that almost eliminates the full motion of the pneumatic portion. So I didn't even bother. I tried it and measured it, and it didn't work. So I just put it back where it was, and I think I'm just going to live with the speed. The other option is you could cut coils off of the main shutter spring, but I don't really want to destroy this thing. If you had more springs, you could try to replace it with different tensions, but it's a pretty difficult spring to replace. That's about it on the shutter. There's a string light seal around the outside edge, or a rope seal, just a black string. So that's about that part. And what else have we got in here? If you wanted to remove the shutter trigger, it's pretty simple. It's just a plunger. There we go. There we go. The shutter plunger. All it is this slotted screw on the bottom, and then it pops right out the front. And it's 3 pieces. There's the outer, there's the outer trigger button here, and there's an inner shaft, which is what's moving right there, and a spring and a little washer. So it's a pretty simple thing, but it was pretty gunked up on mine too. So I took it out, cleaned it, and re-greased it. And to put it back in, it's a bit of a wrestle. So we're gonna leave it right there. We're gonna put this back at 1/10. When you put it out at 1/10, all it does is it lifts this shutter bar up as high as it'll go, which gives you a little more room for reattaching it to this nub down here. So I'm going to, so what the issues you have to deal with are on the back here. There's a nub, and that is your cocking pin, which needs to engage with this slot here. This slot here needs to engage with the trigger plunger, and all of it needs to fit over this tab inside the frame. So I'm going to gently try to get this thing. Okay. Oops. Okay, I've got it over the caulking tab at the back. I've got it over the trigger plunger. Now I'm just dropping the speed wheel back into engagement. There it is. So we've got all our parts in position. This corner here is fully seated in its little milled pocket. So it's fully down. I'm going to put the 2 screws back in and test everything for functionality. You want to make sure before you crank anything down that you can kind of feel it with your fingers and make sure it's solid against its mounting face. You don't want to have any of there's not a lot in there, but the couple spring levers or the flash sync contact, you don't want them being out of place and getting crushed when screwing it back together. I don't know if that's a possibility, but I figure better safe than sorry. Snug these down. I don't know what the alloy is on the body. It's some sort of aluminum. It's too light to be pot metal or zinc. And it seems like a pretty well-made piece, but you still want to be pretty gentle with it. All right, so I've got the 2 screws back in place. And my speed wheel rotates freely. And the speed, or the firing arm moves up and down with it. So that's off to a good start. And let's put it at 100. And my cocking trigger here. Way down in there. Seems to be working fine. There's the lockout. Once it's cocked, you can't recock it. And our trigger there we go. Seems to be working. There we are. Oops. Move all the way down. This is where I was saying the slows are slow and the fast is fast. So the 10 and the 25 are both about take twice as long as they're supposed to. But then once you get into 50, it's actually twice as fast as it's supposed to be. So I don't know where the magic fine line would be. I'm guessing something's going on with the pneumatic cylinder, but it's such a simple system that there's not really a lot that I can figure to do without messing it up. Also, at speeds that slow, you're probably going to be on a tripod or something, or very well braced anyways. So if it takes a little longer, it's not really the end of the world. So that's really it for the shutter mechanism. So this is a job I was specifically hoping to avoid on this camera because it's a TLR, and then seeing that the focus lens and the shooting lens are coupled together with gear, I didn't want to have to retime the lenses because I've never done it before, but both lenses were so dirty, and the grease on this one and whatever they had on the upper lens, the viewing lens, had gone so bad that it would not grind, but it was kind of sticky when you would try to focus it, and it didn't feel right at all. So I just, oh, and also the the set screw on the distance focus ring had stripped out, so I had to take that apart to rethread it. So it had to be done, and I dreaded it, but there was nothing I could do. So these lenses are clean. That's why I've got Scotch tape on them. Oh, reminded me I went to all the trouble to clean these lenses, and I wanted to wear gloves. So, because they're clean, I've got the tape on them. Because it's been a little bit, I didn't want dust falling on them. They've just been kind of sitting here quietly on a desk. And so what I need to do here is there's three things that kind of come into play. The shooting lens is threaded on the back end, and it has this tab right here, which is a stop. The focus viewing lens is a combination of two drives where it's threaded so it screws in and out like the shooting lens, but it's actually cogged as a gear to drive the shooting lens in and out along its thread, which is kind of a cool design and made for a compact system, but it makes it a pain in the butt to reinstall the things. Oh, okay. So, reset. So before I took this apart, I made a note that the viewfinder lens was 6.5 millimeters above the surface of the body when the shooting lens was fully extended, which means when this stop bar would have been fully rotated around and hitting on this stop, which is not currently installed. So at that point, this lens would be sticking out 6.5 millimeters from this surface. Now the trick is you have to screw in the shooting, have the shooting lens screwed in, but you have to have it screwed in to the correct point so that this focus ring bottoms out, pretty closely bottoms out, when it's swung around at the stop position here. So this is fully screwed down, and there's a little tab that goes in here that we'll see in a second. So that's in the right position. So so I know I've got that. When I wind this out the rest of the way, then I can double check the focus lens here, or the viewfinder lens. Now the problem and solutions that they came up with, this is a multi-start thread on this lens, and it has 4 starts. So let me just unscrew it and show you, because I've marked my starting position. And I'm not sure if this is on all of these, but there's a line scribed right here in the body. It's not an accidental scratch, it's actually a scribe line. And, well, I'm not going to unscrew it all the way. But essentially, trust me, that this is a 4 position start thread. So you can start it at any one of 90 degrees. So what I had to do was gently twist it until the thread locked in, twist it all the way down, and see if that lock tab, the stop tab at the back was in the correct position for the stop. If it wasn't, I'd unscrew it and then carefully rotate it 90 degrees until the thread re-engaged, twist it down again, and twist it down again until I finally found the spot. So I marked right here, which had a scribe line originally. Not as nice as this one, but I marked where that thread starts to get it into the right position, so if I did take it out, I didn't have to sit there and fiddle with 4 positions to find the right one. So we've got that one figured out. Now to get the viewfinder lens in, this is also a multi-start thread, but it's only a 2 position. And this This lens also has a scribe line, which somewhat coincides. That's the start of one of the threads right there. And it only has the one line. But the problem is that this this lens can screw in at almost any position in relation to this lens. So this is where the annoying fiddly part comes in. And you want some well-fitting gloves, which I almost need a tighter size than these. Because what you need to do is engage the gears all right. So right there we have the two gears engaged for the two lenses. And then you have to gently push down on the viewfinder gear. Oops. Oh, it's also a reverse thread. All right. So what you're doing, you're pushing down very gently on the viewfinder lens while twisting the viewing lens or shooting lens clockwise. And you have to back it up a few times until you can feel the viewfinder lens engage, and then you can continue to turn this clockwise, which will turn this because of the gear teeth, but also it will drive it in because of the thread cut in it. So now where the tricky part is, I've got two things going on. I can't turn it anymore, but this lens body, this is nowhere near bottomed out where it's supposed to be. However, this bottomed out. So what I have to do is start all over again. Turn the shooting lens counterclockwise until this falls out of its thread, or lifts out of its thread. And I'm going to screw this back down a ways. And then I'm going to drop the viewfinder lens back in. Twist the shooting lens clockwise until the viewfinder drops in. And twist it in again. Okay. So I've got my shooting lens fully bottomed out. And my viewfinder lens is not bottomed out. So what I'm going to do, and since I haven't moved the start position of the shooting lens, my stop finger is still in the same position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install the stop tab and then wind this all the way out until it hits that stop. And I'm going to measure the distance that this viewfinder lens is above the surface and see how, by some dumb luck, if I've hit 6.5 millimeters or if I need to do it all over again and adjust it in or out slightly. So let me get that stop positioned in there. So one place I did somewhat shoot myself in the foot, but didn't know about it at the time, is this stop is actually a slotted hole so that infinity stop can be adjusted ever so slightly. So I'm probably going to have to do a fine adjustment after this entire thing is together using a digital camera and trying to get it set, but I'm going to go by the original scratched surface where the screw sat and try to line it up that way. Then again, over the past 70 years, who knows if this screw even stayed in its right position to begin with. Okay. So now, you can see with that tab in position, it hits that wing and stops it from rotating. So when I wind it back the other way, it's going to hit on that lock tab. And then, so I'm going to measure this projection above the surface. I need a pair of calipers. So, so close and yet so far. So what I need to do is take it all apart and adjust the tooth engagement position so that when it's all back together again, this drops down 1/4 of a millimeter. I had done this so many times before, just testing it. I had figured out the change in distance of a single tooth, but I forgot. So we'll see if I can figure it out again. I almost wonder if they designed it this way where you don't have to completely unscrew this. You can just swing it out of the way. All right, so back again. Unwind, turning the shooter counterclockwise. Now what I need to do is catch this viewfinder lens as soon as it disengages from the threads. All right, and there it is. So I need it to be deeper in when it's wound. I'm going to move one tooth outward. So I rotated the shooting lens one tooth. I've dropped the viewfinder lens back in. And then what I did there is I held the teeth engaged and just rocked it back and forth a couple of teeth until the viewfinder lens dropped back in. So that way this wasn't really driving down any farther than I wanted. And I didn't rotate until the driving teeth were engaged. I didn't rotate the viewfinder lens at all. So we'll drive it all the way back down. Re-swing our stop. Okay. Now we're going to drive this back out. To the stop. There we are. And we take another measurement. 6.6. So not the most compelling of data, but I'm going to guess that one tooth is 1/10 of a millimeter. So here we go again. We're going to drive it out. If you can carefully hold the viewfinder lens in the exact position when it comes out, it'll actually start really easy if you can put it right back down and just let the gear do its work. You don't have, it's only a struggle getting it engaged in the very beginning, getting that first start on it. But after that, if you can gently hold it and just time your teeth, it should thread right back in. I also have some dry, it's not graphite powder, it's a dry graphite film lubricant on the viewfinder, because it shouldn't be dry. It's an aluminum body and a brass gear, and it'll just, it's not a great thing. But you can't put any grease on it because this is your gripping surface for focusing it. So if it's all greasy here, it's going to get all over your fingers, and it's never going to get better because it's going to constantly spread grease. So the dry graphite seemed like the best option, and it seems like it's worked pretty well. I've got helix grease on the shooting lens because it's buried in the back, but everything else is running dry and doing pretty well, it seems. There we are. Had a sticky spot. Okay. Well, now I've done it. Gone the other way. Pretty darn close now. What I should have measured was the position of this at infinity and fully extended. Then I would have at least had a verification point. But that's what happens when you trek into the unknown. All right. So after much struggling, I got it. So I ended up using a surface micrometer and laying it across that lens and then measuring against this face up here. So there it is. And I actually ended up using this slot. I had it down, I was aiming for 256. And I had missed it by a couple thousandths. So I thought, you know what? I'll try out this little slotted screw. And sure enough, it got me like a 3,000th of an inch adjustment on this lens. So yeah, here we are on that stop. We drive it all the way in. We're essentially bottomed out here, which is basically this bottoming out section here. It's finding which of the 4 stops on this multi-start thread you want to use, and they're way off. If you're any of the other threads, there's a big gap here, and the lock tooth is 90 degrees from where you want it, so it's pretty obvious which one you're shooting for, and once you hit it. But that is why I marked it, because as soon as you take it apart, they all look the same. But yeah, the big pain in the ass job on this thing, I think, is done. So what I'll do is I'll do some range tests once it's a little more back together, and set it up on a tripod, and put a piece of put the film gate back in, and put a piece of Scotch tape over the actual film gate, and set up a DSLR on the back of it, set this thing at infinity, and look through the eyepiece and see if it looks good. And then what I'll do is knock it down to 10 feet and check the focus here, check the focus here, 5 feet, 2 feet, and just run through the different ranges and see where we're at. But yeah, kind of one of the good things is once you get it, if this method holds true, once you get it, you never have to do it again, because the lenses aren't going to fall out. You have to wind it so far out that you'd really have to try, and then you've got this stop here. So it really does lock in, unless you really jerked on it and moved this thing in its slot. But I don't really think you have enough torque to be doing that in these tiny little spaces. So yeah, now that this is out of the way, I'll do probably some other shots of the other components. But yeah, overall, it's a pretty simple, direct mechanical camera for being kind of the mystery machine that it is. It's pretty straightforward once you get into it, other than this lens. And I didn't get into the aperture. I have no desire to get into that. And there's nothing wrong with it. You turn it, the irises change. I was fine with that. It was just everything else that needed the cleaning up. So I'm pretty excited to use this thing, and once I get it all back together. So that's it for this part. Now the right side is a little tougher. There's a lot more going on inside mechanically, but there's not really a lot to get into. It's all the film counter and shutter cocking mechanism. So unless you're having a problem with those, or you're doing a whole overhaul, you don't really need, well, and there's also more screws for the viewfinder. So if you're needing to get in and clean your viewfinder, I guess you need to pull this off too. So all I did was take out the 5 screws. These 2 are very similar to the other side. They have a dog point machined into the end that goes down into the bail shaft. These 3 are all the same as each other, so you don't need to worry about mixing them up. All right, so we've got your screws off, and you're going to lift and slide it towards the top to disengage the counter wheel. Just like that. Because it's got a slot right there that the wheel slides into, so you need to slide it past. Inside, we have this little thing, which usually gets stuck there. And rest of the mechanism. So what we're looking at is your film counter wheel, your cocking lever, and assorted levers. This is actually the lever that physically moves the shutter inside to cock it. The rest of this is mostly just involved in the counter mechanism. So I'll cock it and show you how it runs. Oops. A little tricky because that side plate actually holds it all together as it's moving. Hold that down. Oops. See right there. All right. So you can see the counter rotating and the cocking lever going up. And that's all that's going on here, really. So if you need to get into this, this piece lifts out. The counter wheel lifts off, which has a plastic washer on the top, which is important for, it's basically what provides the clutch mechanism as it counts so that the wheel doesn't spin too freely. It provides a little drag so it just clicks along. There is a spring washer underneath that again provides the pressure against that little clutch washer. And there is a tiny hairspring which is attached to the body so it's not going to escape. And it hooks into a little hole in the top of that lever, just like that. And that provides just a little tension for the ratchet, for the feed ratchet. So it clicks against the wheel. And that's real. I don't want to lift it off because I've already done all this. But you know, if I believe there we go. So that little screw right there holds in this side of the viewfinder. So if you need to get in the viewfinder, that's why you need to get into this side. My viewfinder was really dirty, so that's why I was getting so deep into this. All right, that's back in. And then this one also holds on the viewfinder. So since I'm not going to pull any of this apart, it all just lifts off. It's very simple and direct. There's, other than this spring and this spring here, there's really nothing that's going to jump off and escape. This is a friction pinch on this pin, and it seems like it just holds this bar on. So when you're reassembling, you just slide this on and line it up so that the screw hole is aligned through it. So we'll just imagine that we put it all back together, and we've got our steel spring washer on there. And when you drop on your counter wheel, you have to pull the ratchet off to the side. Otherwise it stays under the wheel rather than being grabbing on the teeth on the side. And then this piece drops on right there. It just drops onto this pin, and the fork end hooks onto this pin. And then you take your top cover, and we're going to start at the top and slide down to get that counter wheel into that groove. This is a little iffy. It's not delicate, but it can jump off pretty easy when you're trying to get the cover on. So you want to not bump it too much. Okay. All right. So I've got the tooth in the slot, and I've got the axle in its hole. Visually, my other holes are lining up, so I'm going to drop in my screws and just lightly snug them down, making sure they're engaged in their threads. I'm not cranking it down fully right now because I want to verify that everything is in its place before I really tighten it. Come on. You have to do all this one-handed because if you let go of your top cover, you might have something pop out underneath. Okay, that's probably safe for now. All right, so now we'll put in the bail screws. Sometimes those bail screws are a pain in the butt because you're trying to line up 5 different objects. 5 tiny objects. Okay, so everything is lightly in. So there's a gap. There we go. Between the case and the body. And that is because of that spring washer putting tension on the feed wheel. So rather than, that's why I didn't want to tighten it down all the way, because I wanted to see how big that gap was all the way around. If there's a piece that misaligns inside, it'll be a really big gap. And you know, you need to take it apart and figure out what's wrong. So rather than crank down on something possibly out of alignment, I was just getting it all in place so it wouldn't spring apart. And now I'm pinching it and tightening the screws all the way around. Pinching it so that I'm compressing that washer instead of these tiny little screws. Okay. So we should, let's test our ratchet first. We've got a good click on the ratchet, so that's a good start. It means that little finger is engaged. And when we cock it, our cocking mechanism was smooth. We should fire. Let's speed it up a little bit. All right, we've got a firing shutter. And then as we cock it, the counter should go up. So we're looking good on that side. The front face is pretty simple. I'm just going to show reassembling it. There's a little black velvet light leak or light block that goes on top right there. It'll get a drop of glue. It originally had some glue that's long dried out. And then this top cover just drops straight on. 2 screws to hold it down. front face back on.